Next up, David Charles Allen, Realtor from Village Properties, to let us know everything that's happening about real estate in Santa Barbara. He's also host of the HOP, that's Home Ownership Podcast.
Welcome to the HOP. This is David Charles Allen, Realtor at Village Properties, with my good friend and co-host Patty Teal. How you doing today, Patty?
I'm great, David, but a little on the hot side. In Arizona, it's in the hundreds, and I do mean not even low hundreds, like 110 degrees here. It is very, very hot.
Oh, wow. We've had our fair share of hot weather too, but it's looking like 70s this next week, and we've had a couple days
Poor
in the
thing.
80s. Yeah,
To
a little bit
suffer that
different.
way.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. That dry heat, I bet, can really get you too.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yes.
we actually had some really good fun wind swell days the last couple days as well. So even given the hot weather, we've had the opportunity to get in the water and go surfing. So I know that's probably not something you want to hear either.
Oh, well, I do. I just wish I could just jump through the screen and be there. It sounds lovely.
And then what I'm looking forward to most this podcast is we have a really special guest, Anthony Giannini. He's a sociocultural anthropologist who studies and kind of researches a variety of paths, including mysticism, consciousness, and really everything that goes into creating a better wellness within yourself. So I'm really excited about it. I'm sure you are too, Patty. How you doing today, Anthony?
Hey, David. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm doing phenomenal, but a little bit warm, as Patty said, because I'm also in Arizona.
I can tell. I mean, the good thing about being in Arizona, everyone has air conditioning, right?
Well,
Well, if
mine
you're
doesn't work very
lucky.
well, David.
If you're lucky, you have AC.
If you're lucky, okay, that means that must be tough then, I'm sure. So tell us a little bit more. I know you just got back from a trip to Peru. So tell us a little bit more about why you went to Peru, where you went in Peru, and kind of what you brought back with you from your trip there.
Thanks, David. Well, I appreciate seeing you here on the HOP, and a little bit about myself. I'm a sociocultural anthropologist, and I studied cultural anthropology at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona. And I research people and cultures all around the world, specifically people and their spiritual practices around the world, and looking for the common threads or common themes across different world religions or spiritual lifestyle practices. And so as I was digging and looking at different traditional spiritual practices around the world, I realized that the earliest form of spirituality across all cultures, generally speaking, is shamanism, which basically predates culture, or rather, as soon as we see culture form in human history, we see the culture expressing itself as shamanism. And shamanism is essentially connected to the people and their worldview of animism, which means that the world itself is animated, and the natural world, rocks, birds, plants, mountains, everything has a spirit or a spiritual essence. So that's the essence of shamanism, is connecting with the natural world in a spiritual way in order to find out information or find out maybe a diagnostic. If the shaman is a doctor, he's looking for help from the spirits to find information, find lost objects, help the culture win a war, or treat an illness, or just gain guidance in life. So I study shamanism, and most of my work has been in Peru, in the Amazon jungle. And so I've gone to Peru in the Amazon over the last 4 or 5 years, multiple different times, mostly in the jungle. But this time I was in the Andes mountains.
Cool. That's very cool. I mean, you brought up everything about everything kind of connecting with each other. Now, does shamanism go into frequency? And have you ever heard of like the Schumann's resonance and how we're energy beings and how everything interacts at a certain frequency?
Yeah, definitely. You know, shamanism is a science, and we could say that it's the science of connecting with the natural world. And in that respect, shamans are very aware of frequency and vibration, and using different frequencies to attract or utilize different frequencies for different reasons. So connecting with the natural world is essentially connecting with the different frequencies that are around us. And when we look at things like plant medicine or utilizing the medicine of the natural world, earth, wind, fire, water, all the elements, each of those elements have different unique frequencies that can be utilized for healing in the case of a shaman or a traditional curandero who is a doctor utilizing the natural elements. So yes, definitely everything is frequency, everything is vibration, and we're aware of this to different degrees, and we put this into practice in different ways too, by listening to different music or also thinking different thoughts maybe. And we've all heard of the law of attraction. So that's kind of the Western interpretation of things, but actually the law of attraction is sort of the mainstream modern interpretation of a much older philosophy, which originates as shamanism.
Wow. Okay. Now, do you see what do you get any through any of your research? Have you seen how our technology has changed the frequencies around us in terms of cellular frequencies and like what impact that's having on people's health and wellness?
Yeah, I mean, there's such a variety of research in that field right now, and we're seeing some of the negative effects of technology and EMF and electromagnetic frequencies, and how we have all these bizarre forms of illness like cancer that didn't exist not really even that long ago. So we can attribute that to our environment and also things like the food that we eat as well. But in my most recent trip in the Andes, I went to go visit an indigenous community that lives at an altitude of over 16,000 feet, and there's no roads that go to their village. And it's the indigenous people, they call themselves their Queros, and we went to visit the Quero Nation at over 16,000 feet in the Andes, and we had to hike 3 or 4 hours, really high elevation. There's no roads that go there, so they're very isolated people, and they don't have cancer or issues like we have in the modern world because their frequency of their natural world, the frequency of their environment is so pure. And for example, their main shaman, their main knowledge keeper is a 82-year-old shaman named Taita Asensio, and he hikes better than anyone else, even me, who's a young, fit guy. He was out hiking every single one of us, and I attribute that to his life living a very natural way, also consuming the natural medicines of the area, and generally living a stress-free life in terms of not worrying about the electric bill or things like that.
That really is, yeah, that really is a beautiful way to kind of live. Is there anything you really enjoyed or anything they taught you that was special to you that's always going to stay with you?
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways of spending time with the Queros and the indigenous elders in the Andes Mountains is their integration of spirituality in their day-to-day life. They feel the earth beneath their feet, and they relate to the environment as if it's a living spiritual essence, a living spiritual vibration, a living energy that they are dependent upon as people, because as we live on earth, we're dependent on the elements, and our bodies are composed of the elements also. So according to the Queros, who are the last remaining indigenous Incan ancestors, they have an unbroken spiritual tradition for at least 500 years, and they still practice the same spiritual ceremonies and generally live the same lifestyle that they lived for at least 500 years, way up in the mountains. And so they feel and see that the earth is living, and for them, the earth they call Pachamama, which is Mother Earth in Quechua, which is the native language that they speak. And so Pachamama is sustaining their life in so many different ways. Really, everything on earth is an extension of Pachamama. And furthermore, they connect spiritually to the mountains of their region where they live, and they call the mountains apus, which means like a mountain spirit or a mountain deity. So all of the mountains have their own unique spirit, and they will pray to different apus of the area, pray to different mountain spirits of their area, depending on which village they're from or where their life is connected to through their ancestors. And so they will lay out offerings for the apus. They'll make a ceremony called a despacho, and they'll put out offerings that symbolically represent things like food, money, maybe fertility or transportation or laughter. They'll have things like cookies and glitter that represent laughter and joy, and they'll have like little cookies that look like cars that represent transportation, and they'll have glitter that represents stars, and they'll put out coca leaf, which is their main offering to the mountain spirits is coca. So they have all these physical objects, which really could be anything, but they represent different non-physical attributes related to their life. And through this ceremony of despacho, they're offering to the mountain spirits and asking for protection or well-being or health or abundance in their life based on what they offer to the spirits there. So my big takeaway from visiting the Keros is really that we're all active participants of our life, and our life is reliant on the elements, and we are largely not in control of that because the life sustains us and we don't necessarily sustain our life. We have a certain level of control or choice maybe in how we want to live our life or which direction we're going, but largely we're dependent on the elements. So we have to approach our life in a sacred way and ask permission and be respectful to the spiritual energies that are around us all the time, because really we're just children, we're just visitors on this planet.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, what would you say a typical day for them looks like? And you're saying they have these offerings they put up that look like cars. I mean, do they have any technology up there? Do they have ovens? How are they cooking? And how do you even get invited to this special place since they are so secluded?
Well, I was really privileged to be able to go visit the Keros. I went and traveled with a group of about 13 people, thanks to an anthropologist who has an organization in which he is. Anthropologists are the intermediaries between essentially the indigenous people and the government and social services, because as we know, pretty much everywhere around the world, the government and westernization is kind of infringing on the indigenous people. And so the government wants to provide things like schools and toilets, and they want to build roads for easier access to all these remote places within indigenous communities. And anthropologists can sort of represent the indigenous people and are often bilingual. They speak multiple languages, so they can sort of represent the indigenous people and spread awareness among their community, sort of what the government wants to do, because outsiders generally have their own agenda, and sometimes indigenous people don't necessarily know like how to handle bureaucracy or different things like that. So it's really important to go to these indigenous communities. First of all, you can't go unless you're invited, and if you're invited, generally you are going with an anthropologist, somebody who knows the community. And myself, I'm an anthropologist, but this was the first time that I was ever really fully immersed in such an isolated culture. So I went with a group of different people, a Peruvian shaman and also an anthropologist, and then myself and others were tourists, and we were just visiting life like they live for a week in their traditional community. And so we had to hike really far, and everyone was really out of their element, you could say, to say the least. And there's a lot of adjusting that Westerners do when they're in a foreign environment, especially an environment like that, which is really cold and rainy and frigid. And so they live in little stone houses, you can't even see the houses really because they blend in so well with the mountainside, and there's dirt floors and hay on the dirt floors, and it pretty much gets to be freezing at night, and there's very little resources there. And I was really surprised by their lack of using wood, like firewood, to keep warm, because they do have wood, but there's no trees that grow up there at such a high altitude. So they have to haul wood in from a couple hours away via alpaca, and it's rather expensive to do that. So really, they make ponchos and other clothes out of alpaca that keeps them warm, and that's their main livelihood. Really, their life is centered around alpacas, which they make different textiles to stay warm, or to, they also eat alpaca too. And they also have potatoes there. They farm potatoes because potatoes are pretty much the only thing that grows at such a high altitude underneath the soil, as you know. So they're pretty much fixed with alpacas and potatoes. And then they use coca leaf centered around their life. And if you've ever heard of coca leaf, it's an amazing plant. It's very sacred to the Incans and the ancestors of the Incans and traditional cultures around jungle regions, but especially in the Andes. And it's a blood cell oxygenator, and it's really high in protein and minerals and calcium. So there's been a lot of studies done on coca leaf where people that don't necessarily have a lot of calories in different communities, but they have a lot of coca leaf, they're not actually malnourished because coca has all the vitamins and minerals that they need to survive. So we can look at the traditional people in the Andes Mountains, such as the Caros, and we can sort of develop a new understanding for their respect for coca leaf and why it's sacred to them, not only because it represents the spiritual worlds, but also because it sustains their life as well physically and gives them energy. And when you chew coca leaf, you're not feeling tired or thirsty. You have a lot of energy. And scientifically, we've studied this, and we know that it's very high in minerals and vitamins. So there's actually like science now that we see, modern science, and that is finding that these indigenous ways there's a reason for that.
Anthony, we were speaking about it being prohibited in the United States. Is there a reason why? Just because they haven't studied it? Do you think it competes with the drug market, or why have they banned it?
Well, I think there's a lot of negative stigma around coca leaf because of cocaine, because of what we've seen in Western culture, maybe around 1980s, when cocaine was booming in the United States and Florida, and drug cartels and all this bad rap about cocaine. And obviously it's very, very bad for your health and things like that. But in order to make cocaine, they pour gasoline onto large amounts of coca leaf and mix who knows what else into it. And it's a really, really terrible process that totally is like sacrilegious to the indigenous people in terms of how they respect their coca leaf and how it's connected to the spiritual world. But there's a lot of reasons why, and maybe it's a little controversial, but we see also around the world the suppression of indigenous people in their traditional ways, also in the interest of Westernization and Western expansion and industrialism, because we've seen how with colonialism and the conquest of the Spanish, for example, how the ideology and culture of indigenous people is actually being destroyed actively. And I believe that's still happening today, large part. And I think making sacred plants like coca, for example, is just one way that we continue to see the suppression of indigenous people. And there's so many examples of that across the world, even in the United States, Canada, South America, Africa, you name it.
Yeah. Well, gosh, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
I think you're hitting on a major point that just kind of with our culture now, it's kind of like the pharmaceutical company in general. if you're able to grow your own resources and grow your own healing products in your backyard, they wouldn't be able to sell you different kinds of medications. So you're no longer a consumer for them. So I think that's a lot that's went into the Western civilization, is that we've gone away from this holistic approach, which has worked well for so many generations, into this approach where we have these chemical compounds that are created and mass produced, and not solving the specific problem, but solving maybe a symptom. And if you're continuously going back to fix another symptom, you're not going to the root of the problem, which I feel like is what these shamans kind of relate to. You got to figure out what's actually happening and dissect it, and not just solve a certain symptom.
That's really true. And one of my observations about natural medicine in general, plant medicine, shamanism, utilizing the natural elements around us to heal our body, we have to understand that our body is a master healer in itself, and it knows so much more and is so much more wise than we are in our minds or in our methods. So our body is really divine, a divine instrument, and naturally we're born as healers, or our biology is able to heal itself and treat illness in such a remarkable way. And the body is really durable and can outlast extreme environments, extreme conditions, extreme toxins inside the body we can naturally eliminate, as long as the body itself is supported. So we have to think kind of medicine and wellness in a completely different way, and really how it comes from the inside out. And we can't rely on outside sources to heal our body, because actually our body heals itself, and we just need to create an internal environment so our body can be in homeostasis, which is the natural state of healthy cells and wellness.
Yeah, I think that's a huge play into what your thoughts are every day, and creating your own reality in a sense. So whatever you're visioning or creating within the reality that you can control, or you're thinking you control outside of the elements that's around you, is really going to set you apart on where you're healing from and where you're taking all that stress in and whatnot too.
Yeah. And I love that anthropologists are being an advocate for these indigenous people, because you look at what's happened to our Native American people and, their plight and what has been done to them. And they're some of the poorest people in America, and all in the guise of helping them. So I'm glad that you and other anthropologists are actually taking an active role in protecting their Native way of life.
Yeah, and not only that too, but there's so many languages and cultures that are continually dying off, weekly, if not daily, around the world. And it's really sad to know that if we don't document their language, their knowledge of medicine, their knowledge of philosophy, their worldview, their knowledge of really even practical things and how to survive in their natural environment, then it's lost forever and we'll never know. And
Wow.
it's really, really sad. And there's so many diverse communities in the world, and those diverse communities have such a wide range of knowledge, that's essentially been developed over thousands of years, a lot of times independently of any other group of people. So we see how groups have developed their own ways of knowledge, and we've seen how also groups have shared their knowledge over the years too. But there's so many pockets of wisdom in every culture, in every group of people, and we need to respect people and respect their ways of life, especially the traditional ways and also the ancestral ways of life. And we have to remember where we came from and our ancestors and where they came from, because modernization is relatively new, and all this technology with electricity and indoor plumbing is relatively new. It wasn't always this way, and we got here because of our ancestors who endured the natural elements, who learned from the natural world and lived with themselves against all odds. They survived and faced adversity, and that's really what makes the human spirit strong, and that's what makes us healthy and resilient. So I think also by relying more on technology and becoming sort of suffocated by westernization, we lose the essence of life, and we see all these modern health problems, not only physically but also emotionally or mentally, with depression and all these terrible psychotherapy diagnostic conditions that we see in the modern world, that our ancestors never had, because they were just out there living life, and they had a reason for their life, which was to farm or connect with their land, and that gave them health as well.
Yeah, that really is beautiful. I think we talked a little bit more about how I just went out to Tennessee to kind of explore the countryside, and it was so beautiful out there, but it was really ominous, which was very interesting. Was there's these bunch of these huge cell phone towers that were kind of every 10 or 20 miles, just gigantic, probably 100, couple hundred yards up in the air, and every single one of them had at least 5 to 10 vultures just circling around them. So it was very interesting to see how these towers were representing this kind of death in terms of vultures. So,
Whoa, that is
um,
kind of creepy, but it's very significant, isn't it? You have to watch for those signs that nature gives us. And I was going to say too about the Amish, bipolar disorder, ADHD, those are unheard of with the Amish. So I think that, kind of living more in the cycles of nature, getting up with the sun, going to bed with the sunrise, it's a different way of life, and the nervous system is in a little better shape.
Yeah, we all have circadian rhythms, which are our natural biological clock, and our body's supposed to perform certain functions at different times of the day, and it's our natural biorhythm, and every animal species has that natural biorhythm. And the more that we live in synthetic sort of life, then our biorhythm's going to be thrown off. So it's no wonder that we don't feel well if our biorhythm is all crazy, or we're eating food that's not really food or not really nutritious. It's a manufactured food product. And I liked what you said, David, about the vultures. And you can see already that you are interpreting your own experience shamanically when you see vultures around cell phone towers, and it's the animals are communicating with you in that way. So it is a tradition of indigenous people all around the world, and we see it in Arizona here in North America, for example, with different indigenous people who see animals. And the traditional interpretation is that if you run into an animal when you're out walking around somewhere, that animal means something, and it represents a certain spiritual archetype. And the animals are pointing certain things to us so that we can learn, because nature is our biggest teacher. And there's different ways that we all can learn from the elements, because the elements are an extension of us. So actually the shamans in the Amazon talk about the plant teachers, and the medicine plants actually have spirits, and the spirits actually teach the shamans, and you learn from the plant spirits by ingesting the plants. And so this is their common way of interpreting shamanism or interpreting their traditional ways. And it's only sort of more new actually, that we've tried to analyze everything instead of going with our intuitive feeling of what these things mean.
yeah, I think it's a lot what you're saying too, is like the intuition is a lot of this food and stuff we've been eating, and all the stuff we were programmed to watch and continuously feed our mind and our spirit. It kind of detracts us or detaches us from our natural instincts. So the more you can get back to being grounded and trust your gut, I think that's huge. I know you talked a little bit about before we came on about this condor eagle prophecy that I think you're told about while with the Caros. If you want to go into that a little bit more, I'm really interested to hear more about that.
Yeah, I'd like to talk, because the Caros, they live in an isolated community, and especially now with COVID and all of the shutdowns everywhere and the quarantines, you would think that they might not want to see anybody come visit their village from the outside. And that's true. They are aware of COVID and they don't want foreign viruses coming to their land, but it's destiny for their knowledge to be shared with the rest of the world. And what you're speaking of is the prophecy of the eagle and the condor, which is an age-old Incan prophecy, which talks about how in the old days, the eagle and the condor used to fly in the same sky. And the eagle represents intellectual wisdom and rationalism and science, and the condor represents the way of the heart, the feelings of our inner child, and the emotions and the intuition. And there was a disruption in the world, and such was the disruption that the eagle began to fly in North America, and the condor began to continue to fly in South America. So we have intellectualism and science and rationalism really booming in the Western world, and we have still the shamanic traditions and the ways of the heart booming still, in as they always have in South America. And it has been foretold by the Incans, by the Q'ero Nation, and many other indigenous people who relate to this story, that the eagle and the condor will once again fly in the same sky. That is, that the teachings of South America and North America will once again reunite, and the values of indigenous people and their spirituality and the human spirit and its power of wisdom and intuition will once again glide and synchronize with rationalism and science and what we think of when we think of philosophy or very technical studies. So that's one of the reasons why we were able to go visit Q'ero Nation, is because it is the time where they should share their knowledge with us, because they believe that we're approaching another extinction event, and for the extinction event, we need to learn their wisdom, and this wisdom can awaken humanity and give us guidance as we enter challenging times.
I think a lot that we've seen over this last year or so, been through all this. I think it has been this great awakening of consciousness within a lot of people. And I think exactly what they're saying, it can be both. It doesn't have to be one way or another. You can have that mixed philosophy of consciousness, and that we all are connected to everything around us. And together we make up this environment that we're living in.
That's true. And we've sort of built America and the American dream all about competition, and evolutionary theory is all about survival of the fittest. But I don't believe that that's the way. Actually, cooperation is so much more powerful than trying to dominate your opponent or outcompete your opponent. And now is the time for us to have more awareness about how we treat each other, and how we are living our own life, and how we treat ourselves, and how we treat the environment. Because with awareness, then we can choose, and it's a moment-to-moment choice. And we choose the world that we want to live in, and we co-create that world together. So I think now more than ever, there's a big awakening happening on the earth, and through the indigenous teachings that have always been with us, through the wisdom of the ages that survived so many different epochs of time, this wisdom has always existed, and it's always been preserved. And now we see that it's coming once again to the forefront, even in the United States and Western countries, because the more modern methods of science and technology are very, very limited compared to the ancient wisdom and the ancient sciences that have always existed and been with us from day one.
Yeah, exactly. Spread that compassion and lift each other up instead of competing for one another for these materialistic things that we've been led to believe are so important, and what makes you who you are, when knowing yourself and how you interact in this world is really what's important.
So trust yourself, because we're all
Exactly.
a part of this living world, and nothing's set in stone, and nothing happens until it happens. And we largely can choose what that is, and we play a big part in creating that for ourselves and for each other. So I'd like that to be the message of the day for all of our listeners, that you are powerful, and now's the time to take back your power and make choices that you are in line with, that feel good for you, with respect for each other and the natural world.
Yeah, so true. I think a lot of people look at their history so much that they can get shame or anything from their past, when in reality it's all about the choices you make that certain day, and you can change every second, you can change any minute of the present. And once you change something small like that, you widen your focus to something that could be much bigger, and that's more important to you. So don't think of your past as something you can't live with. It's all about making those choices for today.
All we have is the now.
Exactly. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Anthony. Really enjoyed this.
Thank you very much, David. I'm so happy and honored to be on your show and here with Patty as well.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It was delightful. And I knew you and David would have a lot in common because you're both so tuned into your spirituality. And David also is into plant medicine and very careful about what he ingests. So I'm so glad you had such a great conversation today.
It was a great
Yeah.
opportunity for us to get together and share.
Yes, thank you
Yeah.
so very much. Until next week.
Let's give it a go next week, Patty. Thanks again, Anthony. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.